he was seeking a warrant. In my pea brain, I did not, in no instance did I equate that to a raid.
Why is this happening? The people used to respect information. They would never think about doing something like this.
Corey, you murdered son of a you.
The man needs to go. Should have been fired.
You are a terrible person. You killed that old lady.
We would rather die than not get published.
This may be the grossest violation of the right of free speech that I've ever seen.
She wasn't somebody who was that fragile.
Legal access and dissemination of confidential criminal justice information.
We warned them before they'd hired him. We're hearing all these really bad things.
No, I despise him now. I mean, I didn't like him from the get-go, but I'm afraid of him. I'll be honest, I'm afraid of him. I think he's capable of doing something far worse to me.
But are we going to sue? Yes, we will.
Welcome to BJ Investigates, a show I just created and might never do again. In today's episode, we're gonna get into the violent police raid that y'all might have seen on the news a few weeks ago. It had to do with that small town Kansas newspaper reporting on some local potential corruption or whatever, and then the cops barged into the newspaper and the lady's house and the lady died. Sound familiar? Yeah, it freaked me out too. Y'all know I had to investigate. Let me show you what I found. Remember, everything that I'm talking about comes from the public record. Y'all can find all this stuff yourself. This is just the commentary and opinion that I have after conducting a public investigation of my own. A truly free press is the backbone of any democracy. This concept is not new. The very First Amendment of the most foundational document in our country's history affirms and protects each and every one of our rights to the freedom of the press. This protection is no accident. Now, say what you will about the Founding Fathers because, there's definitely plenty to criticize. But there are a few things that they actually did get right. It's kind of like that old saying, even a broken clock is right twice a day or whatever. Even if you're from the Founding Fathers suck camp, so does a broken clock. It really sucks at telling time, but twice a day, it's exactly right. One thing they got right was their prediction that governmental leaders and those in power cannot be left to their own devices unchecked. Jim Morrison has famously said, "Whoever controls the media controls the mind." And from what I can tell, it's hard to disagree. If a corrupt or tyrannical government can use the force of state to silence dissent or criticism, that government is no longer for the people. It's a dictatorship. Over the past few decades, huge corporations and private corporate interests have been buying up local newspapers and news stations as fast as they can get their greedy little grubby little talons on them. And once these formerly independent newspapers and news stations do get bought up and they are owned by a huge conglomerate, then the corporate interests determine what the agenda is. The people that own them determine which stories get run and which stories don't get run.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Do you see where I'm going with this? Sometimes these private equity groups own and control hundreds or thousands of local newspapers and news stations across the country and will spin the news to maximize profits instead of search for the truth. Back in 1998, a small-town Kansas newspaper called the Marion County Record was headed toward that very fate. That is, until a Record staff member took matters into his own hands. Mr. Meyer had been working for the newspaper for 50 years at that point. And remember, this is all the way back in 1998. He started working there in 1948, and he refused to see a corporate newspaper chain ruin what he had worked so hard to help build. So in 1998, 50 years after Mr. Meyer began working at the Record newspaper, he purchased it to preserve his lifelong dedication to the truth. He would eventually pass away, leaving the newspaper to his wife, Joan, and their son, Eric. Eric took after his parents and became an esteemed journalist in his own right. He worked for a newspaper called the Milwaukee Journal for 20 years, and he even taught other journalists as a professor at the University of Illinois for 26 years. So the raid itself took place on August 11th, 2023. But to get the full context of the story, we have to go back just a couple weeks before that. On August 1st, 2023, the Marion Police Department posted to their public Facebook page that a Congressman Jake LaTurner, was hosting a, quote, public forum at a local restaurant that same day. The restaurant was called Carrie's Kitchen.
Visit Carrie's Kitchen, a locally owned and operated cozy cafe in the heart of Marion, specializing in locally roasted craft coffees, teas, ice cream, and specialty food items for breakfast, lunch, or just a sweet stop.
And it's owned by a woman named Carrie Newell. Now, at the time, Carrie Newell had a pending application for a liquor license, which will be an important factor in just a second. So Eric Meyer, remember the son of the guy who had bought that newspaper, and now the son and his mom run it? Okay, so that son, he's now running the newspaper. Eric and some of the newspaper's staff members do decide to show up to that public forum at Carrie's Kitchen that has this congressman there. The police apparently asked the newspaper staff, including Eric, to leave, and they said that they did that at the request of the restaurant owner, Carrie Newell. So the next day rolls around after that whole fiasco, and an anonymous, confidential source sends a tip to that newspaper owner, Eric. And this anonymous tipster is spilling the tea on Miss Carrie. Remember her, the lady that just kicked out the newspaper owner like yesterday from the restaurant, even though it's supposed to be some type of public forum event? So newspaper owner the very next day gets a DM on Facebook from this confidential informant saying, Carrie, the owner of the restaurant, just kicked you out yesterday. I got some tea to spill on her. Now, according to this confidential informant, Miss Carrie had actually had a DUI conviction, and she was apparently driving without a valid driver's license, which in and of itself, is probably against the law or whatever. But it was even more important because Carrie was applying for a liquor license just a few days later. And if you're applying for a liquor license, you have to have a valid driver's license and you have to have a clean driving record. You can't have a DUI, basically. So this confidential informant's like, nah, she can't get the liquor license because she don't have a valid driver's license and she has a DUI felony conviction. Now, this is all hearsay. I'm just telling y'all what I read from the stories. I don't know. I didn't check if she has a conviction or doesn't. But that is what the confidential informant told to Eric Meyer the day after Eric Meyer was kicked out of Carrie's restaurant. See, under Kansas state law, a person with a felony DUI conviction cannot obtain a liquor license. Under that same law, a person without a valid state-issued Kansas driver's license could also not obtain a liquor license either. Okay, so just to recap here, the newspaper owner gets a tip from a confidential informant about this DUI relating to the liquor license, Carrie, all that. The tipster wants the newspaper to publish a story and make it public that Carrie has this past conviction. The tipster also wants that story published before this upcoming city council liquor license vote, where they're going to vote on Carrie's license, because obviously he wants it to be out so they can vote no. He don't want her to get it because he thinks he's following the rules or whatever. Unfortunately for this confidential tipster, the newspaper owner, Eric, said he had no plans of running this story in the paper. According to the owner, Eric, the newspaper staff was able to verify the information that the informant provided through a public record search. The staff member had called the appropriate, authority or department or whatever, and that agent that the newspaper staff called did advise the staff member on how to use the public website to get driver's information. The staff member did follow the steps that the agency had given, and the staff member did verify that Carrie was indeed convicted of a DUI back in 2008. And the staff member also verified that Carrie did not seem to have a valid driver's license. According to the owner of the paper, though, he felt like it was a setup. His exact quote was, "I felt like we were being set up." He said even though the information was technically public information, and even though Carrie had kind of gotten on his nerves by kicking him out of the public forum yesterday from the restaurant, Eric just had this hunch that the information was being leaked to him through Carrie's ex-husband, who Carrie was in active court battles with. So for those reasons, even though Carrie had just kicked him out of the public forum at her restaurant one day earlier, even though it was technically public information, Eric said he just did not feel comfortable sharing this information. He said he felt like it was a setup, so he wasn't going to run that story. But he did take some action. He did inform the local police chief, who he already had a little bit of history with from literally the day before or whatever, kicking him out of the Cary restaurant. Just 2 days later, on August 4th, 2023, Eric did contact the police chief, Gideon Cody, to inform him of what the tipster had said about Cary's DUI conviction and lack of driver's license. Eric also included the staff member's findings, verifying what the tipster had stated. The town's vice mayor also requested that the newspaper send her the info that they had gotten on Cary. The reason the vice mayor wanted the info was because of that upcoming liquor license vote that was supposed to take place now in just 3 days. Well, the city council vote came and went. They awarded Cary the liquor license. 4 members of the council voted in favor of granting the license, and 1 voted no. The one person who voted no was that vice mayor, who requested Eric send the newspaper's findings on Cary's DUI. But that's not all that happened in the city council meeting. Cary, that DUI restaurant owner, had a big statement to make herself. Now remember, just like 1 week earlier, Cary had asked the police chief to kick the newspaper owner and his staff out of her restaurant, and the police had obliged. Now a week later, she starts making some really serious public allegations against the newspaper at this city council vote meeting. She claimed that the paper had obtained her personal information illegally, and that they had shared it with the vice mayor, also illegally. Cary went so far as to make an official statement to a local news station called 12 News, where she specifically accused the paper of getting her information from a piece of her mail from the Kansas Department of Revenue. According to Cary in this interview, she reported this illegal activity to the police, who we already know were willing to do Cary's bidding. Some video footage has actually now even been released, showing the tense interaction between Cary and the newspaper staff.
Brought to my attention today that my private and personal information that was illegally obtained by a local reporter was shared with Councilmember Ruth Herbal. Ruth then took it upon herself to share that information with others. Again, that information was legally obtained. It's a vulnerability within the KDOR system. My concern is that a council member would recklessly and negligently share that information with others without doing the due diligence of making sure that the information that they were sharing was at least legal information to share. So I'm going to bring it to your guys' attention that this is going to be placed with the county attorney, that there is a Driver's Privacy Protection Act that was breached by you, Ruth, and the individual that shared that information with you. And I'm very disappointed that as a representative of our community in your elected position that you would behave so negligently and maliciously. And I really hope that your team members here today take note of exactly how vile your behavior is.
Okay, wait a minute. Come back, Cary.
Yes, ma'am.
Talk about this. Who gave me this information?
Would you really like me to disclose that now? Because I've actually, I got.
Yes, we would like you to disclose that now.
Yes, please.
I'm sure you would like it,
because we already reported this to the sheriff of the police.
Come to order.
We believe has happened. I cannot prove. I will tell you that it was material that was provided to us, and we chose not to disseminate it any further.
One question, Eric. Was it shared with me?
No.
Thank you.
Certainly not by me. Did you share it with her? No. Not obtain it. Someone sent it to us, and we were concerned about having received it for precisely the reasons that she states. You have copies of messages I sent last Friday explaining that.
So y'all know we like to do timelines on this channel, so I do just want to do a quick recap to make sure we're all on the same page. The newspaper gets a confidential tip through a Facebook DM that Cary has a DUI conviction and is driving around without a valid license. The tipster wants the newspaper to publish a story on this conviction before the city council votes on Cary's liquor license. The newspaper owner feels suspicious, like this is some kind of setup, so he doesn't run a story about the DUI, but he does pass the conviction info along to the police chief. Eventually, the newspaper owner also forwards the information to the vice mayor of the town, who is involved in this liquor license vote. Then Cary, the alleged DUI convict lady, runs straight back to those same exact police, who we already know are willing to do her bidding because they kicked out the newspaper at her request a couple days earlier. And she reports that somebody illegally obtained that information about her. Cary then goes on a PR push, basically talking to the local news media about how someone allegedly illegally obtained her information information and she's making all kinds of allegations about the newspaper owners. And none of this accomplishes the tipster's original goal, which was to make sure that Carrie didn't get the liquor license approval anyway. She got the approval anyway. Tipster, his goal wasn't even accomplished. But a whole bunch more drama happened because of that tip. So like I mentioned earlier, originally Eric, the newspaper owner, he had absolutely no intention to run this story about a DUI conviction or about driving without a license because he felt like the tipster was acting on nefarious purposes or for nefarious reasons. He felt like it was a setup, no intention to run that story. But in the meantime, since he had made that original decision not to run the story, all kind of stuff had happened, including Carrie accusing the newspaper of illegal activities and going and reporting on the story to the media herself, thus making it an issue of public knowledge and public concern. The newspaper did publish a story about the city council meeting and about Carrie's accusations. The article was entitled, "Restaurateur Accuses Paper, Councilwoman." Now, this story was written by Eric Meyer, the newspaper owner, and a staff member named Deb Groover contributed to the story as well. Now, 2 days after that story ran about Carrie's accusations during the city council meeting, a county magistrate judge signed a search warrant, allowing the police to effectuate an extremely broad and invasive search. The thing about search warrants, though, is that they have to, quote, particularly describe the place and items to be searched or seized. And they also have to meet a strict probable cause threshold. In other words, the police cannot just bust up into somebody's house or business without a really, really good reason. And the reason doesn't just have to be good, but the cops have to also convince a judge to agree with their reasoning. And even if the cops can do all that, they still have to follow very strict rules about which items they're searching or seizing and how they handle and process all the information or the items that they find. A search warrant is not a carte blanche permission slip to ransack somebody's home or business, but that's exactly what happened in this case. In this case, the police told the judge that they were investigating possible criminal activity relating to, quote, unlawful acts concerning computers. As you can see at the top of the warrant, where it describes the items the cops wanted to seize, the petitioner is the police chief, Gideon Cody. Remember, that's the one who kicked the newspaper staff out of the restaurant at Carrie's request during that congressman gathering like a week or two earlier? So the judge signs the warrant. That one's dated at 9 a.m. By 11 a.m. that same day, every single officer who worked for that department was dispatched to simultaneously raid the newspaper office and the owner's home. Now, remember from earlier in the story, Eric was not the sole owner of the newspaper. He was a co-owner with his now 98-year-old mother, Joan Meyer. Joan would still get up and go work at that newspaper too. She wasn't just sitting at home. She was really active in the process of the newspaper. Eric and his mother Joan lived in Eric's childhood home where Joan had actually lived for like 70 years. So the police show up not only at the newspaper headquarters, but also at Joan and Eric's family home, and they start ransacking the place. And the cops are being horrible and disgusting throughout the whole thing. It is open-air prison guard tyranny to the highest degree.
This is my house. Ma'am, please get out of here. We'll be out of here pretty quick. Get them out of here. They're here. How many computers do you have in the house, ma'am? I'm not going to tell you. Get out of my way. It's all right. I want to see what they're doing. Well, they're working. I don't care what they're doing. You can go on through if you want. What are you doing? Those are personal papers. Yes, those aren't papers. They're electronic devices, which is what the judge said that we're supposed to take. Okay?
Now, Deb, the reporter that I mentioned earlier who helped Eric write that article about Carrie's accusations 2 days before, she was actually physically injured by the police officers during this raid. According to reports, Deb's finger was badly injured when one of the police officers violently snatched her personal cell phone out of her hand during the violent raid. The staff at the newspaper was not allowed to leave, while the police ransacked their workplace, which apparently went on for hours. Meanwhile, back at the Myers residence, 98-year-old Joan was terrorized for hours on end by low-level cops who were waiting on Chief Cody to come to her family home and search it. Remember, this lady's been living here for 70 years. Now, according to her son and newspaper co-owner Eric, the cops stood around silently, watching Joan from the doorway of her own home for literally hours. Eric thinks this was an attempt to punish Joan and threaten her about what would happen in the future if she allowed stories that were critical of the police to be run in the paper. The very next day, after the violent raid, 98-year-old Joan Meyer tragically passed away. According to Eric, his mother was in excellent health for a 98-year-old woman. She had no history of heart attacks or cardiac issues. But in the hours following that violent and dangerous raid, Joan was highly distraught, and she just wasn't her usual self. Eric went on to do an interview describing his mother's last day. According to Eric, Joan was inconsolable in the hours following the raid, and I honestly can't blame her. She refused to eat her dinner that night, and she couldn't sleep or even rest or calm down. She was muttering statements under her breath like, "This is going to be the death of me." When Eric attempted to get Joan to look on the bright side, Joan simply responded with, "I'll be dead by then." And this ominous prophecy would come true the very next day. Eric believes that the stress caused by the raid was the reason Joan died, and that if it hadn't happened, his mother would still be alive today.
How dare they take the last day of her life and make her filled with fear and anger.
The coroner in Joan's death agreed. According to Eric, the coroner stated unequivocally that the stress Joan underwent during and after the raid was a major contributing factor in Joan's sudden passing. My heart goes out to all Joan's family and loved ones. The police took basically everything from the newspaper headquarters, including all of the stuff they needed to run prints of the newspaper, like the internet routers, the hard drives, the computers. The police took all of it. So the staff didn't even have what they needed to publish that week's newspaper, but they were determined to tell their own story on their own timing. The staff and a host of volunteers came together and basically took it old school. They revived a bunch of the antiquated methods that they had used to get their papers out in years past. This paper, I think, was established in like the 1800s, and from what I could tell, it's been continuously running since then. They probably had all kind of stuff, they probably had like the printing press right there in the back, just stamping it or whatever. But I'll see if I can insert some footage. It was really cool. The whole community came together, volunteers came, free speech advocates came, they were printing, they were pressing, and they got out their version of the story. And it's like, seized, but not silenced. And I'm like, yeah.
Seized, but not silenced.
It just was that important that we not be deterred.
And once this story got out, it went viral almost immediately, making major headlines across the world.
This is the front page of the first paper published here at Marion County Record since that raid Friday.
And it wasn't just the story that got out. It was the surveillance camera footage and HD interviews with Eric Meyer, the lone surviving newspaper owner.
We would rather die than not get published.
This may be the grossest violation of the right of free speech that I've ever seen.
The corruption and tyranny of the police department was laid bare for all to see on the world stage. Less than a week after the raids, the top prosecutor in Marion County, Joel Enzi, withdrew all the search warrants and told the cops to return all the items they had seized from the 3 raid sites. The top prosecutor's reasoning was that there was, quote, insufficient evidence to establish a legally sufficient nexus between this alleged crime and the places searched and the items seized. In other words, the cops didn't really meet the probable cause threshold that they were supposed to meet in order to get this open license to steal personal items and information from journalists during a violent terroristic raid. Now, since the story went viral internationally, the police chief has attempted to defend the cruel and inhumane actions of his department. But it doesn't seem like the powers that be agree with him, at least not publicly. For what it's worth, Carrie Newell, the restaurant owner with the DUI herself, went on a Facebook tirade under a fake name, giving her side of the story. Soon after this violent, unnecessary, seemingly unconstitutional raid took place, like basically a week later, Chief Gideon Cody defended it, basically said, our department did nothing wrong. He mentioned that federal law that was supposed to protect journalists and said the law doesn't apply in cases where there's reason to believe the journalist is taking part in the underlying wrongdoing. So unsurprisingly, the police doesn't take accountability and doesn't want to admit that he made a mistake, and it does not come as a surprise to me considering the actions of this violent department that I have seen with my own eyes.
Chief Cody initially issued a statement to the police department's Facebook page defending the raid. He closed the door on Tuesday's discussion.
He has a duty to the public, to the people who pay his salary, to explain his actions.
Carrie herself, she claims that she's just another victim, telling the New York Post that she's received hundreds of DMs and messages saying she has blood on her hands.
Corey, no, you murdering son of a you. You're going viral, and it's all for all the wrong reasons. Stupid woman. You are a terrible person. You killed that old lady.
She has participated in several interviews herself, often crying during the process. And to the newspaper's owner's credit, even though he does believe this raid led to the death of his mother, he agrees with Carrie on one point. He thinks the cops just used Carrie and her claims of identity theft as a pawn to get to Eric, Joan, and their newspaper. See, according to Eric, the real reason the cops wanted to raid the newspaper was because the paper had been conducting an investigation into the police chief himself and some of the allegedly sketchy behavior that he was involved in at his former place of employment. According to Eric, the paper had been looking into this chief and the chief got wind of it and wanted to make the paper suffer. But he knew it would be too obvious and highly illegal if the cops went through the paper's information just to find info about the investigation they were conducting on the police. So Eric believes that the cops used this Carrie Newell DUI identity theft thing as pretext, basically like a Trojan horse, to give the cops free reign of all the newspaper's files. This seems like a plausible theory to me. Now, in the time since this raid, some experts and organizations have also commented and opined on the situation. Some have suggested that the raid violated a federal privacy law that protects journalists and newsrooms from being searched in exactly this type of raid. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press has also denounced this activity as well. So on August 30th, 2023, one staff member involved in this debacle, Deb Groover, sued the Marion Police Chief Gideon Cody for violating her constitutional rights when he snatched her personal cell phone out of her hand. She's also suing for the injuries she sustained during that violent and traumatic interaction. I, for one, am just as appalled as anybody to see this blatant violation of First Amendment rights that led to the senseless loss of at least one life. But at the end of the day, I can't say it was surprising. It's why the First Amendment exists. Tyrannical governments have tried to suppress criticism about tyrannical governments since the beginning of tyrannical governments. This is just in keeping with the same pattern. And tyranny like this continues to happen to this very day, especially in these small towns where everybody knows everybody and everybody's friends with the police chief, and they work out their personal disagreements with each other through abuse of the legal system. And when the occasional case does go viral or garners international attention, it raises the stakes for everybody because they know people are watching, and transparency is really the only key to fix this mess. Anyway, that's all I really had for today. In the meantime, facts ain't defamation. Love you, mean it. Okay, bye.